Hello and welcome to Super Awesome Running. You can find more of the show's content at Super Awesome Running on Instagram and on Threads. As I've mentioned a couple of episodes ago, I've been really getting into Threads and having a lot more fun with it now, and thankfully getting more engagement now that I seem to be figuring it out. So if you haven't already followed, please be sure to do that because it's a lot of fun on there, and I love getting into conversations with fellow runners and fitness enthusiasts and really anyone that's trying to better themselves. If you also have not yet left a five-star review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you may listen, most players do have reviews. If you could go ahead and take a moment to do that, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps other runners stop on by, feel encouraged to hit play, and then hopefully find some useful content for their lives. And if you have already done both of these things, I genuinely greatly appreciate it. I love receiving reviews and follows, and like I said, getting to know all of you and everything that you're going through. Today, I figure since it's the top of the year, it is January 7th at the day of the release of this episode. I thought I'd just kind of talk a little bit about my background and you can get to know me a little bit better since you are doing the kindness of listening to me talk about running and neurobiology and fitness and mental fortitude and all these fun things. I thought, why not introduce myself a little bit more than I have in the past? So I shall start in the beginning, except not quite the beginning, but in high school. I got into running by signing up for cross country in high school. And actually, it was kind of a funny thing. I realized I needed a PE credit to graduate from high school, and I was in my junior year. I hadn't yet done anything, so I only had 4 semesters left to get at least 3 credits worth of some kind of physical activity in order to graduate. This was the summer before my junior year, so I just graduated my sophomore year and I started looking at all my options, and I was not a team sports or fitness person. In fact, I really never considered myself to be an athletic person at all because I spent most of my life playing video games and staring into computer screens and being just enamored with computers. So I kind of categorized myself as a nerd. So again, this is part of the reason why I ignored physical education entirely because that part of me just was not something I ever considered for myself. Well, looking at all the options that I had, I saw cross country and thought, well, running just seems so easy, right? I mean, you just put on some shoes, you head out the door and you run. So I signed up for that one. It felt like the most accessible. And I believe I've mentioned this before, but the first time I stepped on a treadmill that summer to try to get myself prepared to run long distance, which is a funny thing to do because I was never going to run on a treadmill in this class. It was always going to be outdoors and B, like, it's fine. This is, how my brain worked. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to totally train myself for long distances over the summer. I couldn't even do a quarter mile without feeling like I was going to pass out and die. I mean, it was rough. But I kept with it a little bit and started to build it up, build it up. That semester was still pretty rough in terms of just my physical part of the course because my body was not at all used to running, and I really underestimated the challenge of running at that time. But thankfully, I had a really nice coach. There were some great teammates on it. They knew that I wasn't there because this wasn't like a passion of mine, but they were very fun to hang out with, and I was kind of just like a fun person being there, realizing that I have no idea what I'm doing, and they all like took to that, and so it was a great memory looking back. But that really kind of planted the seed for me with running. I graduated that. I was going to do track and field. I got freaked out about track and field. I didn't want to do that either. So I basically just found a way for my school to allow me to work out at the gym and they would log the hours that I stayed at the gym and that could turn into a credit. So that's what I did for the remaining 2 credits. But I had planted that seed, right, of being a runner. I didn't know it yet, but I would come back to it many, many, many years later. Over the next 5 to 10 years, I would run on and off. It was something that I'd kind of go through seasons where I'd get really into it for 3 to 4, sometimes even 6 months, and then back off for a little while and then get back into it. And that's pretty much how I stayed for, at least 5 to 10 years. Then in my graduate school program, I started to get back into running, especially because they had a really nice gym. So I got back into kind of taking care of my body and being interested in being, a little bit more fit, especially because it was business school and business school is basically just one long drinking trip. Um, and I needed something to offset the amount of damage I felt like I was doing to my body. So I got back into running and decided I wanted to run a half marathon. I'd heard other people talking about it, but, you know, never I didn't really appreciate the distance at the time. I just knew that people signed up for this thing called a marathon, and there was a half marathon, so I thought, "Okay, that seems like something I could do." And, I mean, what a mess looking back. I didn't have a training program. I never did any speed work. I never did any hill work. I would just kinda run haphazardly. The week of my half marathon, I was meant to now I know I was meant to be tapering and taking care of myself, but instead I decided that I needed to make sure that I could get to 13 miles, so I tried to run as many of the 13 as possible, like, the Thursday before the weekend, so I got to, like, 8 or 9 miles that day. I mean, just a terrible idea to do that because, as you know, you're just depleting all of your glucose and glycogen stores, and you're risking injury, and, like, your legs are not gonna be completely healed by the time you show up. I didn't know any of that, but then I was able to complete my first half marathon. It was a mess, as you might imagine. I bonked at like mile 9 or 10 and had to walk for a bit, but I was able to cross the finish line, I believe, in like 2 hours, 32 minutes. And then again, I went through a period of 5 to 10 years where I barely touched running. I didn't really do any more half marathons. I might have done one, but I can't remember it if on the top of my head. But I wasn't really committed to this idea of racing or getting these distances in. At some point, I transitioned over to spin class. My friend dragged me to a spin class. I fell in love with it. It was a style of spin that was very popular at the time in like 2015, 2016. Studios everywhere, kind of because of Soul Cycle with the dark lights, the, EDM music, the remixed music, the dancing on the bike. I really loved it because I love music. Part of the reason why Matt and I and Jen have the Super Awesome Mix podcast network is because we adore music and we love to talk about it. So I got really into taking spin class. And then at some point again, not really ever planning this, I thought, I want to be a spin instructor. Like, that seems like so much fun. And I really liked the motivation element of spin class and the coaching element and all the really nice, cool things that instructors would say to us while they were on the bike to get us to move and to dig a little bit deeper and show up for ourselves. So I emailed the owner and asked about becoming a spin instructor. She was very excited for me because she knew me at this point since I'd taken hundreds of classes. I went through her training program and she put me on the schedule. So I was a spin instructor for like 3 or 4 years and I didn't really run during that time. I was all in on spin and just had such a blast. It was really fun being a part of a fitness oriented community, getting to know people who were all there to work on themselves, to feel stronger, to feel better, to feel like they are again, just doing something for themselves, and it was very rewarding. I loved that time period in my life, but I wasn't running, I was just doing spin class. And again, I always fought with this idea of I'm not an athlete or I'm not someone who is physically fit, this is just some weird side gig of mine. I never connected the dot that this might be something that I really genuinely love and might be a purpose for me. So I moved to New York after being in Texas for my entire life. Moved to the city, and the running community in New York City is out of this world. I mean, it's unbelievable. For being such an urban environment, you wouldn't imagine, but there are so many great places to run in the city. Central Park, of course, comes to mind. It's a great running track. I always tell runners, especially whenever people would come and visit and join our running club meets from, somewhere in the States or somewhere from Europe, for example, they marvel at the track that is Central Park. And if you ever run the marathon and finish in Central Park, it's very hilly, it's very challenging. You can never relax for those 6 miles of the loop. And if you do multiple loops, I mean, it will crush you. I did my 18-mile long run and it was really rough in there because those hills just add up. You can get a lot of elevation in Central Park. Anyway, so Central Park has this really rich running community. The highways along the east side and west side have great running communities, and you can even just run through the city streets. If you go out early enough, you don't have to get stopped too often by lights. Running bridges is so much fun. Anyway, all that to say that there's a very rich running community in New York, and so it kind of began to set that seed again of like, I miss running. I really have enjoyed spin, but there's just something about running that just keeps calling me back. And I lived right by part of the marathon route and watched a bunch of people run the marathon and still it didn't really connect the dot. And it wasn't until a friend of mine, he was a coworker at the time, and we were becoming friends, but he had just finished his 4th or 5th marathon, and I looked at him, running by me and literally said to my then girlfriend, now wife, "I'm gonna do that. Like, I'm gonna run a marathon." And just committed to it. I said it just so matter of factly. It's like I knew I was going to do it. There wasn't any like I want to or maybe I'll look into it. It's like I'm going to do this. And that is when I really recommitted to running and have been a consistent runner and built in strength training and all of that. Incredible, incredible fitness journey. And finally, now I identify as someone who is athletic, who loves fitness. And, one part of the story that I didn't mention in all of this fitness journey is that in college, I studied neurobiology. And I studied it because at the time I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I will admit, picked neurobiology because it sounded like the smartest degree I could get. I was a bit egotistical in college. I'd like to believe I'm a little less egotistical these days. I found a way to kind of tampen it down, but I picked neurobiology because it just sounded so smart and so impressive. But I ended up loving it. Studying the brain structure, understanding, how it works, all the different parts of the brain, reading some incredible research about, just why we make the decisions we make, how we make them, all the subconscious elements to our brain that we don't really fully understand, consciously. You feel yourself doing something, you don't even know why you're doing it. Like that part of our brain I find really interesting. And then I also had the chance to take a lot of psychology courses because it was neurobiology. They paired it a lot with a lot of psychology studies and also some sociology. So again, just always kind of building that context of we as humans, both as individuals in our own minds, but then as individuals in a group and in a society, and how do we interact with one another to, kind of get what we want. And how are we like animals and how are we unlike animals and all of this really fascinating stuff. So I started to connect all of these dots. I had the running, the fitness, the spin class, the motivational elements, the coaching, and then finally connecting it all the way back to my neurobiology degree and realizing this is what I want to do with my life. I want to talk about running and talk about how and why we run and what do we do when we hit a wall during a training program or hit a wall during our race or we don't want to get out of bed or we are exhausted and all we want to do is just sit on the couch and couch rot, but instead we find ourselves pulling our shoes on and heading out the door anyway, and then discovering afterwards, that we're so happy that we did that. And I'm still so fascinated by the two sides of that coin. How do we have this internal dialogue that seemingly fights itself constantly? I'm just in a constant state of battle of wanting to go out and do things and then wanting to stay in and not do things. And I just am so fascinated that both sides of this conversation are me. These are literally just me, right? But it's like these two push and pull beings in me that, one person kind of is looking out for me in one regard, and the other person argues also looking out for me in another regard. And ultimately, there's like kind of a third person that decides which one of these two people we're going to listen to. And I just think that is such an interesting structure for us from a mental and psychology point of view and a neurological point of view. So I am really excited about this podcast. I'm excited to where it's going to go from here. I'm eager to find runners as guests on the show. So if you are someone that has had an interesting journey into running and you would love to share your story and what motivates you and how you get excited or not excited to head out for a run, send me a DM on Instagram at super awesome runner and we'll connect and see if we can make it work. But I am really excited, as I said, for 2025 and this season, and just wanted to let you know a little bit about why I'm so excited and about my journey here. I will leave you with a little bit of, something that I've been thinking about this last week that is off the topic of introducing myself, which is using music as a cue to get you excited to head out the door whenever you're feeling like you don't want to go out. This is something that has been helpful for me, especially as I was training and deep in my training blocks for the marathon. There's a point where you're going to be tired and you don't want to go out and do a 3 hour long run because that's a very long time to be on your feet and moving and exercising and pushing yourself. And you might not even want to do the 4 mile run, even though, because, you've just done it so many times before and you're honestly just bored. Um, what I would do is I created a playlist throughout the entire training block, and every single morning before I would go out for a run, I would put on headphones, I'd listen to that playlist. And it got to the point where that became a cue and part of the habit cycle. I've talked about habits before in this podcast in an earlier season, but it's cue basically is what triggers the start of a habit. And then there's the action and then the reward of the habit. So the cue here was the playlist. The action was going out for the run. The reward at the end was the feeling of satisfaction of having done it. So the cue becomes very important because once your brain learns that that's the cue for the action, it's that subconscious mind that takes over. So, a trick that I did for myself, as I mentioned, is listening to the same playlist, the same set of songs every single morning before I went for a run meant that on the mornings I really didn't feel like going out. Like the humidity would be like 90%. We had a very humid summer in New York this last summer. I would follow the exact same things I would do any day of the week and any weather situation, put on my headphones, hit play on that playlist, and just kind of let my body take over. And just the same way that how to brush your teeth without thinking about how to brush your teeth, that is what started to happen. So before I knew it, my shoes were on, my heart monitor on, my watch was set, and I was out the door beginning my run. Even though, my conscious mind was telling me like, "Oh my gosh, it is so gross outside. What are you doing?" My subconscious mind was just bopping along and on my way. So that is a little tip I have for you. And, to bring it back to music, which I mentioned that I love, I think it's a really cool trick to train yourself to listen to the same kind of set of songs as you get ready to get out the door. Because on those mornings when you don't feel like doing it, it will help you be a little bit more automatic in making it happen. So, with that, that's going to wrap up this week's Super Awesome Runner episode. Again, you can find me at Super Awesome Runner on Instagram and on Threads. Please reach out. Let me know how it's going with you and what challenges you're facing and any topic you might want to chat about or hear me talk about on the show. I appreciate your time as always, and I hope you have a wonderful week.